2023. And if we look at where that biochar is being made, the global market is obviously dominated by production in North America, which had about half of the worldwide production of 350,000 metric tons. Where is that biochar going? Well, again, according to the global survey, about 70% is headed to agriculture, which is great news. But if we think about these numbers for a minute, worldwide production was 350,000 tons, and the US produced half of that, so say like 170,000 tons. And 70% of that went to ag, it's about 125,000 tons. This sounds like a lot. But if we spread this over the croplands, which are, on this map in green in the US, and we put, say, I don't know, 1 ton an acre over each of those acres, the amount that would be covered is the size of the city of Chicago. So what that tells me is that given this knowledge that we have, given this huge land mass of agricultural lands that we have just in North America, that there's a lot of growing to do as an industry. And as long as growers will apply biochar, the market is really got a lot of potential. But growers right now, they're not really doing that. So why aren't farmers using biochar? Well, one of the main barriers to the adoption of biochar is really the very thing that makes it so cool in the first place. And that's that biochar is versatile, that their physiochemical properties are different depending how they're produced and what they're produced from. Again, we've got this little chart that I showed earlier of these different biochars, and you can see that, if we look at barley straw and we compare it to this juniper, that particle size can really change. And this can have a huge impact on things like water holding capacity. If we look at just one feedstock and we look at how the properties of that feedstock change depending on the amount, how long it's in the gasification system, the amount of oxygen, whether or not there was secondary combustion, you can see that there's a big difference just looking at this biochar. As I said, if we look at what this looks really different on the macro level, but it's also really different on the physical chemical property level. So here we're just going to graph one kind of parameter. This is what they would call proximate values in a laboratory test where we're looking at the amount of stable carbon, volatile carbon, and ash. And you can see that the seed waste made at a lower temperature has a lot more stable carbon than this seed waste made at a high temperature, which is almost gone 50% to ash. And so it's really where this volatile carbon is going, whether it's going towards stable carbon or whether it's going towards that ash. And this has really direct consequences for soil fertility and how it pertains in the soil. So if you compare again, the biochar is made at a low and a high temperature, you can see that the biochar put at a higher temperature has this ash content, which provisions fertilizer value, it provisions liming value, while the biochar made at the lower temperature has a lot more value for carbon, which of course helps address soil carbon deficiencies. And so when I get calls from growers saying, hey, I'm really interested in applying biochar, what kind of biochar should I use? How much should I use? I don't really have a good answer to give them, because biochar can't be applied as a one-size-fits-all solution. Biochars vary in their properties and the types of benefits they can offer, and soils vary in their needs. And so to answer this fundamental question about what kind of biochar to use and how much to use is constantly like, well, what are you trying to accomplish in your soil? What's the limiting factor in your cropping system that you hope to address with biochar, and how much biochar do you need to accomplish that, and what kind of biochar can be useful? And to sort of just skip right to it, in order to get the most benefit for biochar or compost or dolomite or any soil amendment is that you have to identify cropping goals, find a product that can meet that goal, and use it at a rate that makes agronomic and economic sense. And if you're familiar with fertilizer application, this might sound a lot like really familiar, right? Like the 4 R's: the right rate, the right place, the right time, and the right source. These principles that are important for correctly utilizing fertilizer and other amendments. So today I'm going to provide you some examples of what we've done to kind of make tools that can help you make decisions around biochar, help farmers make these decisions. how you can best kind of make those predictions to help you also improve your yields and your soils. I'm also going to talk about some NRCS incentives and some tools that we've created to hopefully turn this knowledge into adoption. So I'm just going to give a quick example of how this sort of intentional pairing works. And I want to do that by talking about some work we did in Eastern Washington. So when I first started at ARS, I met these farmers that were up in Eastern Washington, the Gady family. They were from Rockford, Washington, and they'd been farming on their property for nearly 70 years. And they grow a lot of grass seed, although they also grow a variety of rotational crops like oats, wheat, and canola. In pre-1990, field burning was used quite a bit in order to control pests and pathogens. And the farmer, Larry Gady, was concerned that excess residue would cause disease. And so he wanted to get rid of all this straw that came after he harvested the seeds. Now, he noted at the same time that electricity prices were rising. So he had this idea to build this on-farm gasifier that could use straw to power his seed mill. And so in order to do this, he made a partnership with the USDA to build a research-grade gasifier to power the seed cleaning mill. This was not a slow process, or this was not a quick process. This happened very slowly. And so over 3 or 4 years, they received funding, they built this gasifier. And then of course, by that time, the energy crisis had passed and it no longer made economic sense for Larry to hook up the gasifier to the seed mill. But what about this other stuff that was going on at the same time, right? What about this biochar that was made by the gasifier? Did that have any value for the farm? Could he use this gasifier to address some soil deficiencies that he had in their soils? Now, like many soils in the northern Palouse in Washington, the Gady soil is becoming acidified by the use of synthetic fertilizer. On the Gady farm, the pH should naturally be where this brown line is, somewhere around 5.5, 6. But as you can see, if you measure the pH in the soil column on the Gady farm, it tends to be below 4 or at 4 in the plow layer. And of course, this is from the use of mineral fertilizers and the acidification of soil. And so most people would say, well, just add lime, but there's really no lime in that region of Washington. And so it doesn't make economic sense to add lime to these soils either. And so speaking with Larry, we were thinking about whether or not biochar could help bring up the pH of his soil so that he wasn't trying to grow wheat on pH 4 soils. And if you've ever tried to grow wheat in pH 4 soils, you know that your yields are going to be extremely low because wheat is so susceptible to aluminum toxicity. So did adding biochar to the Gady soils help? Well, using the gasification process, we were able to tune this biochar so that it had a really high calcium carbonate equivalent. So, about 15% of what you would find in lime. And we figured it would take about 8 tons an acre to ameliorate his pH to get it up to a level that was optimum for wheat growth. We also, so we formed these plots. We added 8 tons an acre of biochar. We added hydrated lime at 1 ton an acre. And then we had non-amended plots as well. And what happened was pretty dramatic and surprising to me. Biochar increased wheat yields by almost 300%, right? So 2.88 times what was in the control plot. Now, lime also increased it. It almost doubled the yields, which was still amazing. But again, lime isn't very available in this region of the country. Both amendments similarly increased pH and both decreased soluble aluminum, although lime did a little bit better at getting rid of aluminum than the biochar did. And you can see that we have these incredibly dramatic results, right? So these pictures were each taken in April. These are the plots that had no biochar, right? And this is the plot where we added biochar. So you can see that you had this early season growth, which was really helpful for moving the plant towards harvest. So I was really excited about these results, and I thought, I had never worked with biochar before, and I thought, oh, this is great. I've solved the yield gap problem in agriculture, I'm going to go put biochar in everything. And so we added biochar to grapes. We added it to minefields that were abandoned. We added it to blueberries. We added it to rangelands. And only in some cases did we see increases in yield. And this was really disappointing to me because I couldn't understand why we were seeing such great results in certain cropping systems and no results in others. But in reality, this made a lot of sense because if you go back to the meta-analyses that are in the literature, you can see that biochar tends to do better in low pH soils. And that in weathered soils, like for example, in tropical soils, it depends on the feedstock and how it was made and what it was made from. And so these results, once I had a chance to contextualize them, were really not surprising at all, but just reiterated this idea that in order to have successful biochar results, that you have to really pair your biochar with your soil deficiencies. And so here, when we were able to pair problems with pH, with high calcium carbonate equivalents, we had great results. But in rangelands where we were just simply trying to add carbon, but weren't thinking about the other needs of the soil, we weren't seeing these increases that we had seen in wheat. And so by using biochar thoughtfully, by identifying the needs of the soil and the goals of the application, we could find a product that met that need. We found a rate that met it, that made sense, and we were able to use biochar effectively. So again, going back to these principles of soil fertility and soil nutrients, this made a lot of sense. And so you would think that farmers, with all of this knowledge that researchers have discovered over the last 2 decades, that farmers would easily be able to make this pairing between biochar type, biochar rate, and soil needs in order to be successful. But that's actually, really difficult. So this is a classic case of where farmers are drowning in data and at the same time starving for knowledge. So as a result of this, over the past few years, my lab group has been trying really hard and diligently to develop tools that take all of this information and create tools that biochar users, so farmers and biochar producers can use to put the right biochar in the right place at the right rate. And the current tool we have for that is the Pacific Northwest Biochar Atlas. So this tool, which is available at the website pnwbiochar.org, was originally developed for the Pacific Northwest in the United States. And so thinking about Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. Again, it's available at pnwbiochar.org, and it has several functionalities, including educational materials about biochar, online decision support tools, case studies, a really out-of-date producer directory. But today I just want to focus on the decision support tools that are available, and then I'm talking about our plans to expand it both to the entire United States and recently to Latin America. So again, this tool was specifically for the Pacific Northwest. So the tools I'm going to be showing now are pretty Pacific Northwest central, but I will talk about how they're being expanded. So in order to make this pairing between biochar, soil, and crop, there's 3 steps that you have to go through. The first step is gathering information. And then the second step is using that information to figure out what your agronomic goals are. And then the third step is estimating benefits. We'll just go through this step by step. So the first step is getting information. You can either do this by pulling up a map that's available on our website, clicking on a point, and it will, on that point, it will tell you all kinds of things about your soil. So it will tell you about the soil series, the predicted chemical properties of that soil, physical properties of that soil, so things like soil texture, and then also moisture properties of that soil. Now, again, these are predicted properties, so they're not always on track. Again, if we were to look at the predicted properties of the Gady soil, it would tell us that the pH of the soil is this brown dot and not this green line. And so it's really important that you have, good real-time information. And so although you can click on this lovely map and bring up some properties, it's even better if you have a soil test where you can input them manually. And so what that would look like is going through and putting values from your carbon test about organic matter, fertility, pH, and then texture. And then from that data, the algorithm in the back will tell you whether or not your carbon is considered high or low, what your soil fertility looks like. Now, again, soil fertility is kind of a tough one because it's all through the lens of whatever crop you're growing. And so to support that, in the background, we have the fertility requirements for over 40 Pacific Northwest crops. These are going to be expanded when we move towards a national atlas. And then through that lens of fertility for the specific crop you're looking at, it'll tell you information about your nutrition levels, your acidity levels, and your moisture levels for that specific crop. Now, from this information that you've learned going through this process, learning about your soil and your crop, it'll ask you to choose 3 goals. I've got the goals that we have currently on the database on the back end of the algorithm. Some of those are around carbon, some are around water, others are around fertility, so increasing, decreasing pH, increasing fertility in terms of plant macronutrients, increasing microbial activity, and then reducing salts or binding heavy metals. Based on those goals, you can pick them, and the algorithm will go back through our database, say which of these biochars are good at meeting these goals. It will rank those biochars and then recommend it. So for example, here, your first choice would be Oregon white oak, produced at 700 degrees C, because it met the priorities of carbon, nutrition, and water holding capacity that we chose in this step here. Okay, so then step 3 is picking appropriate rates. From this menu, you would pick down, the biochar that the algorithm suggested, and then whether or not you want it in tons per acre or metric tons per hectare. And it will tell you what the expected contributions are at these different application rates for stable carbon, plant macronutrients, and other attributes. So, of course, the most important thing that farmers care about is, well, not the most important, but one of the important things farmers care about is whether or not it's going to be economically sound. So what you can do is put in your biochar cost, what your expected change in crop value is, whether or not you'll have increases or decreases in other crop inputs, and it will predict over 5 years what the estimated benefits can be. You can change the crop margin over those 5 years, or you can keep it the same. So I just want to point out some limitations of this tool. Again, it was really just intended for the Pacific Northwest. I never expected this to be a very popular tool. We built it as part of a grant application as kind of an outreach tool. But it ended up being really useful for farmers. So it's pretty limited in its function and because of its geographical range. The map function and the crop database are only relevant to the Pacific Northwest. It doesn't estimate greenhouse gas savings. And all the biochars that are on the back end of the Atlas right now are lab produced. So they're not available commercially, which is also really disappointing. But just hold your thought on that. So for a minute, I just want to wrap this story back around to the experiment we conducted in Washington State. After we collected our yields and I was so confident and excited about the results, I went back to the farmer, and Larry and I were standing in the field and we're looking at the plots, and we had this beautiful wheat growth in the biochar and the line plots. And I said, Larry, we increased your yields by 300%. And he looked at me and he's like, it's not going to work. And I said, well, what do you mean it's not going to work? And he's like, if I sell this at $500 a ton, even these extreme yield changes we see are not going to cover the cost. And when I went back and did the math with a $4,000 investment per acre on 8 tons an acre crop, at the end, after 5 years of these like incredible gains in this commodity crop, we were still down $185 an acre, which was incredibly deflating. And And that's because the success at this point of biochar was really based on yield increases, right? You had to have these tremendous yield increases to offset this tremendous cost. But what if the material is less expensive? What if we could kind of like recalibrate our definition of success? 2 years ago, the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, did exactly this. They released Conservation Practice Standard 336, which offers cost share for the application of biochar compost or biochar compost mixtures, as well as other carbon amendments. And this is awesome because it covers, between 75 and 90% of the biochar or the carbon amendment you're using. So it really changes that value proposition of biochar from a yield improver to conservation practice. And this is important because when we think about things like no-till, when we think about things like cover cropping, farmers are not implementing these practices because they hugely improve yield. Rather, farmers are implementing them because they care about the soil and they want to improve it. And so the lovely thing about 336 is that it changes that proposition of biochar from money to ecosystem services. And I just think that's so important. So let's go back to Washington and think about what happened if that farmer in Washington had decided to contract 336. Well, the cost of the biochar would have been reduced from $4,000 to $1,000 with a 75% cost share. And that, at 300% increases in yield, would provide the farmer almost $3,000 an acre after 5 years, which is pretty cool. So again, I just think it's great for this proposition value to have changed. So I just want to introduce a bit about 336 and then I'll wrap up. So the soil carbon amendment, it's a conservation practice standard. It helps producers address resource concerns associated specifically with the loss of soil health that's related to soil organic matter, sequestering carbon, improving soil carbon stocks, improving aggregate stability, and improving habitat for soil microorganisms. It provides technical considerations for the application of these carbon-based amendments, including compost, biochar, and other amendments that meet the requirements outlined in the practice standard. There's some criteria for these standards. I'm not going to go over them a lot, but I want them here for the PDF so that if people need to reference them, they can. You can also just Google CPS 336 and read it for yourself. Right now, I believe this conservation practice standard is open for public comment. So if you have comments about how these standards are important for soils or for biochar producers, you should absolutely contribute comments to how the standard should be changed. Let's see. Okay, so we are, I talked about the limitations of the tool, but what I'm really excited about is that we're addressing those. We've received money from the NRCS to expand the Biochar Atlas nationally, and so we're working with a lot of partners right now to do that. USDA, we've got about 10 labs across the USDA that are working with us to characterize biochars. We're going through the standard IBI standard operating procedures for analysis of biochar. We're seeing how those biochars might be heterogeneous. They might be heterogeneous. So, how do different samples result in different properties of the biochar depending on where the sampling was done, how the sampling was done, and which lab analyzed it. And so we're going to have those results available, and those results are also informing the efforts to create national laboratory standards by ANSBE. We're working with Washington State University to develop a greenhouse gas and carbon model so that you can predict Tier 1 emissions and carbon savings from biochar application. We're working with Oregon State University to expand the mapping function, and then my lab is working to expand the crop function. So right now, in the kind of prototype of the tool we have that we're working on, we have the top 10 crops for every state. So instead of having to look at how biochar might affect blueberries in Oregon, you can see how it'll affect corn in Minnesota. or cotton in the South, which is also super cool. And then we're working to do farmer conservation planner and other outreach, and that's being done with USBI and American Farmland Trust. And of course, all of this is hoping to improve agricultural yields and address resource concerns. I want to go back just for a minute to this database that we are building. Rachel Bashiri, who is a fellow in my laboratory, she is collecting samples from biochar producers all across the United States and Latin America. If you have a biochar sample that you would like to have analyzed for its physicochemical properties, we are more than happy to do that for you. Right now, we have a lot of samples. We've done over 40 samples. We'd like to do a lot more. We have a lot of samples from woody material. We've got some from herbaceous stocks, but we'd really like to get some more samples for these feedstocks. But even if you have a wood biochar and you're interested, this is free. We provide you the analysis, and then that analysis is actually qualifies the biochar for 336. So if you'd like a free biochar analysis, I'm your girl. You can look up how to submit a sample at pnwbiochar.org. And then when we first got this money from the NRCS to expand the Atlas nationally, they said, Kristen, this is great, but we need something now. We can't wait a year for this to be released to a website. What can you do for us? And so we built a spreadsheet-based calculator that'll perform similar functions as the Atlas. It's not as fancy and it's not as informative, but if you'd like to check that out, it will tell you whether or not an amendment qualifies for the practice and if it provides a benefit. Again, that's on the Pacific Northwest Biochar Atlas under Tools. And finally, we've, this intentional pairing of biochar properties with soil deficiencies is great, but we need some more things too, right? Farmers need to know how to apply it. They need to know what other resource concerns biochar is good for. And so we've been working with USBI, some other partners, American Farmland Trust, University of Nebraska, to build some fact sheets. Those are available on the USBI website. They're also available on the Biochar Atlas website, and that they really talk about how to use biochar in agriculture, and that's almost as important as why. And so we've also developed a really long, extensive FAQ about what biochar is and how to use it and how it addresses different resource concerns. That FAQ is also available at the Pacific Northwest Atlas website. And again, the point of all this research in this talk is that we really need, these data that we have in these 40,000 publication is amazing and great and represents huge leaps in knowledge about biochar, but we have to be able to take that knowledge and distill it into information that's not just good for plant growth, but it's also good for ecosystem services, the bioeconomy, the climate, and for economies. And so I know that I've gone over a lot today. So if you have questions, I think we have a few minutes. However, you are always welcome to contact me via email or Teams. And I'm my best time of my day is when I get to interact with stakeholders and collaborators. And so if you've got questions or you just want to chat biochar, please get in touch with me. And that's all I have.
Fantastic, Kristen. That is a lot of good information. I know you never fail to never disappoint. That is some amazing stuff. At this time, we have some opportunity for questions. And Chris Harding, you have a number of questions in here. Rather than reading one by one, do you want the opportunity to hop on and ask the expert?
Sure. One, I'm curious if he has a plan on working with, I can't remember the name of the researcher, but Colorado State, and she has a Sentry model. I don't know if you've heard of the Sentry model, but it's used for determining.
Yeah.
Right. And FRAC, I don't know if, I talked to her and she said that FRAC and Sentry could be coupled together. I don't know if that would be, I don't know how accurate that model would be to predict the effect of biochar on different crops. I don't know if you have any data on that. And the next thing I have a question about is whether or not there's a plan. You know, the web soil survey data is great, but with the Pacific Northwest Biochar Atlas, it doesn't match up. So for people who want to do computational analysis, such as myself, the data is lacking. Is there any plan to try to get farmers to, I know it's costly, but to get farmers to share their data so that it's available for people like me, that's in nonprofits that can use it to do computational analysis?
Yeah, so two really different questions. The first question is, that was originally our plan, was to couple the information that we're gathering through this research project with DaySense, which uses the Sentry model, as well as a whole bunch of other models are embedded in that. And so we hired a postdoc to do that. She's working on creating a tool with Jim Amonette. But I will say this, the NRCS has decided to reduce the modeling portion of our funding based on priorities of the incoming administration. And so I don't think we're going to be able to do that work with DaySet, which is incredibly disappointing. We will be looking to other funding sources to try to get that funded because I do think it's important. The other challenge around that is that there are very few long-term experiments with biochar. There's maybe a handful of sites that we can look to see how biochar carbon changes over time. And because the Sentry model uses timescales that are pretty big, we really need to be able to verify the model with long-term data, and we don't have that. And so it's really challenging thinking about kind of what creating the model isn't that hard. Validating the model is going to be incredibly difficult until we have more long-term data. So we will have some modeling. I'm not sure it'll be in DaySense. The second question about data sharing is, I think you make an amazing point about web soil survey. It's an incredible tool. It assumes if you want real-time accurate data, you're not going to get that from web soil series or web soil survey because it's based on the soil series, not on soil management. There are some digital mapping tools that are being released that predict things like soil carbon and other soil properties, but they're not based off of actual data. They're more based off of spectra, satellite data, those sorts of things. And so while they're a little bit more accurate, they're still not as great as getting a soil test. There's a tool that's coming out that Kristen Trippe at at Missouri. She's with ARS. She's developing a tool called Shape, which will take a soil sample and then compare the soil health of that sample to adjacent samples. So that's probably the closest you're going to get. And I'm not sure when Shape will be released, but once it's released, that could provide you some local data. And by local, I don't necessarily mean Gold Beach, Oregon. I mean, like if you want something within like 50 miles of where your soil sample is, you might be able to pull down that data. Farmers do not generally want to share their data, is my experience.
Thank you, Kristen. We have Edgar, who's been waiting very patiently here. Go ahead, Edgar.
Hello, James. Hello, Kristen. Thank you very much for the beautiful webinar. It was really cool. I was really looking forward to be part of it and following up for a long the Atlas tool. So yeah, really happy to be part of this session. I just wanted to say that I am a rural farmer in Mexico, and I'm producing biochar using a Contiki. I have like 8 hectares land where we grow different kind of crops, and really more of a kind of hobby perspective. My parents bought the land many years ago, and somehow we still work the land. It's not our main source of income, but yeah, we are pretty happy being around the land and growing crops. I just wanted to say that I would love to send biochar samples to this project, and I can also participate from assessing and evaluating and being part of our research in our land. I'm also part of the North American Committee for developing the guidelines with Chris and Miles. So yeah, I would love to be part of this. I have a background in science of biochar. I was working on a laboratory, maybe you recall the name Selignis for around 4 years. So yeah, I would love to help to this tool to grow and do better and better.
That's awesome news. Merry Christmas to me. I can't remember if I mentioned this or not during the Atlas presentation, but we were just working with International Biochar Atlas. We received some funding to expand it into Latin America. And so we're especially focused right now on Mexico and Colombia. We're just starting that effort. But if you could send me an email, Edgar, that would be awesome. Or if you could just even connect with Luisa Marin, that would be great too. We're working with her through this project. So, but we're happy to pay for folks in Latin America. We're happy to pay for shipping and analysis to try to get as many samples from Mexico. And we're focused right now in Mexico and Colombia, but we'd happily do Brazil. Actually, we're pretty open to doing anyone, south of Texas. So yes.
Yeah,
perfect.
super. What is your particular email, Kristin?
I'll put it in the chat. I will say, again, I don't know. I don't know that I'll be around for the next few weeks because of a potential shutdown. But if I don't get back to you right away, it's because of that. But yes.
Yeah, don't worry. I'll send the email just for you to have it there, and I'll patiently wait till whenever we can reset all of us, probably in the new year. Thank you very much,
Great.
James, Kristin.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you, Edgar. That is Merry Christmas, Kristin. You got an early gift. That sounds a great opportunity for the both of you. And we have a question here asking about, is there a plan to expand this to include mixed crops, for example, when legume cover crops are used?
Great idea. I think it's a little, I would love to do some case studies with that. I think it's really hard because, for example, usually there's not good, so we're getting all of our information about the crop nutrient database from extension materials. And those extension materials usually come from state extension services. And so if there's extension material available for how to manage nutrients within a cover crop, we would absolutely add that. It's hard to take kind of data and create that ourselves, but I would love to do a case study around that. So if there's a farmer that's doing cover cropping that has any kind of data with biochar, we would love to feature that as a case study, but it's probably not going to be worked into the decision support algorithm just because it's really complex and it's hard to predict what crops are going to be grown.
Okay, that was from Karina Stark, and I hope Karina, that you got your answer and can connect on that, follow up on that issue. Wiley Buck is asking, early in your presentation, you had the black and gray bar graphs. Which one was low T and which color was high T biochar?
So the high temperature was the really ashy biochar in this case. And so not all high temperature biochar is going to have more nutrition value than low temperature biochar. It's really the ash content that can predict that better than the temperature. But in this case, it was the high temperature biochar had the most ash. The lower temperature biochar had the most carbon. So the low temperature was black. The high temperature was gray.
Fantastic. And Luke is asking, did Tobias talk about random forest AI modeling a few calls ago? And I believe he did. I'll have to link back to see on those from Tobias. And let me see here. John has been answering quite a few of them here. But are there any other questions here? And I think, Nick, did you have a question? Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, in the pay rate schedules for code 336, it lists the unit as acres. What does that even mean?
Yeah, good question. So actually the payment schedule is not usually in acres, it's usually in cubic yards is what they're doing. And so it depends on what the application scenario is. I didn't know, I'll have to go back through my presentation and fix that because it should be in the payment schedule should be in cubic yards.
Oh, well, I looked up the current 2025 published one for Minnesota, and everything's in acres.
It depends on hang on, let me get back to there we go. It depends on the state, and it depends. I mean, I think the best advice that I can give for 336 is talk to your local conservation planner or your state agronomist. Because it's different at every state level, the payment schedules and how they usually, in my experience, they usually have a payment per cubic yard of amendments, and then there's a limit on how much they'll pay per acre. So does that make sense? So if it's $200 per cubic yard, then they'll do $1,000 an acre, then you're limited to 5 cubic yards per acre.
Okay.
And our state soil scientists recently attended a large biochar field demonstration and expressed a lot of interest. So keep our fingers crossed that we see further progress with in Minnesota on that issue. And Chris is also wondering that he has read that biochar will often be reapplied every 3 years, and is sure that's dependent on the ratio of the hydrogen to carbon or carbon hydrogen and oxygen to carbon ratio. But the crop has an effect. But is there an average reapplication period that you're aware of?
I mean, if we look back again to like indigenous cultures, they put in a little bit all the time, right? That's how we got those huge stocks of carbon in the mollisols in the Midwest. It wasn't because of one field burn. It was repeated burning all the time. There is not, like I said in my presentation, there's not a one size fits all solution to biochar. And depending on what your goals are, you might want to apply it every year. You might want to apply it once and walk away. If you're applying it for liming, depending on how quickly your soil reacidifies is going to really drive how often you apply it. So I think, having a relationship with your crop advisor, looking at your soil testing can answer that question better than kind of a blanket answer.
And Nick also asks, are agronomists not fully on board with biochar? And second part is, do farmers not have enough access to technical support? It seems like the onus is on farmers to discover those tools rather than technical support.
We are trying to change that. And so USBI, American Farmland Trust, ARS, the Pacific Northwest Biochar Group, we are constantly in talks about doing train the trainer trainings. Whew, that was a lot of training. Train the trainer trainings to really help do that, because I think that we need to get extension on board. We need to get state agronomists on board. We need to get conservation planners on board, technical service providers. This is a lot of information in a really small, to a really small audience that has really limited time. And so we're talking this year about doing at least 2 train the trainer events. And then hopefully that becomes a model that we can just repeat in different cropping systems across the US. And so I hope by this time next year, I can tell you that we've done 5 or 6 of these, and here are the people that you can go to tap into their expertise. But I think it would be great if we could put together we've put together these kind of like little fact sheets, but I think it would be great if we could put together like an extension book about how to do this. That maybe not a book, but something a little bit more in depth, because you are absolutely right. It is the onus of the biochar producer, the farmer, the user to figure this out, and it's a lot to ask.
And Kristen, this is is where we're both board members at USBI, is that one of the big USBI pushes is for the large scale application in these systems. And so how do you identify those areas and overcome those barriers? And if I'm hitting it right, Kristen, like I said, she's been more well versed in the farm side than I have. And Sam from Cincinnati.
Hey guys, I'm working on a biochar project here, very similar to the one that Jim is developing in Minneapolis. And just, you know, our feedstock is going to be heterogeneous woody biomass. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts for how something like that fits into this, where it's not like, you know, hazelnut shells, or, you know, it's not something highly predictable. It's going to be more heterogeneous than that. So how do you consider that fitting in with this kind of prescriptive model?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's where the Atlas comes in, and why we're moving the Atlas away from these laboratory produced biochars to real world biochars that people can go out and buy, right? Because when we're talking about implementation, we're not going to be talking about somebody who's making a mixture in a small pyrolysis machine at the pounds to a couple hundred pounds level. We're talking about scaled production at a very high rate. And this is why we're asking biochar producers to send us their biochars, so that if you're in New England, then people can, you know, in part, one of the other cool things about that kind of priorities that we're doing is we're also having people put in their zip code in the new Atlas, so that you can not only find a biochar that can meet your needs, but that biochar should be local, so that we're not trucking it from California to Maine. And so I think it doesn't really matter to me if a biochar producer mixes biochar with manure and green waste or anaerobic digestate and makes that into a biochar. That's great. I don't need to know what the feedstock is. All I need to know is what the properties are, because that's the important thing. It's nice from a research perspective to be able to make those predictive kind of things, like, oh, if we're using wood at 700 degrees, this is what it should look like. But you know, production really varies, so it's hard to make that kind of across the board statement.
Yeah, Sam and I are in the same boat. Is that our materials going through our basic woody materials at a set, pretty much at a set temperature, and hopefully same particle, you know, similar particle sizes, etc. But we're feeding off the what's in our catchment area for the wood stocks, where I'm at 70% hardwood or deciduous trees and 30% softwoods. And Sam down in Cincinnati is going to run in a different mix. And that gets also into how do you know, the need for regional, taking a look at a regional basis, I believe, for, like you said, what's it like in your conditions, and it's hard to get from the national level, get to that granular level.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think we're at the end here. If not sure if anyone else has a question, but since Sam, or otherwise Sam got the last one. Is there a last shot that somebody would like to go for? And it looks like John just came back from Go Biochar, and thank you very much for being in the background, John. There is the USBI web LinkedIn site and website. Please follow those guys, and as well as MNBI. I put that on in there, and I believe Nargis has as well. And again, my email is in the website, or the Minnesota Biochar Initiative email is in there as well. If you would like to be added to our invitation list for the monthly Char Talk series, please shoot me an email, and several of you have while we're in here, and we'll get you added to the list. But we're at the top of the hour. I appreciate that. Kristen will be getting us a PDF copy of the slide deck, and this session has been recorded, and for most of it, I actually have a transcript as well. I'm waiting for our admin person to come back from her holiday trip, and we put in that together. Like I said, we had about 230 people say they were going to come here. We had about 40 coming in and out at various times, and we'll try to get this recording and the slides out to those who attended and those who signed up for it but weren't able to make it, because I know time scales are different. So with that, and we really want to thank Kristen for taking the time to come on out here. It's great to finally get you on board. Also, if you have an idea for Char Talk that you would like to see or a theme that you would like to see explored, please let me know or let us know, and we'll get that try to accommodate you as best we can. Next month, right now, we are scheduled to have a speaker from the University of Nebraska talk about large-scale biochar field applications. So it ties in nicely with Kristen's talk here and the work that she's doing collaboratively with the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. So with that, any parting shots here, Kristen, that you would like to make?
Merry Christmas.
All right. Thank you very much, Kristen. It was great having you here, and thank you for coming to Char Talk, and I hope to see you all. Let me know if you want to be added to the list. We'll get you on there, and we'll see you next month. Thank you much.